I want to thank everyone for watching our videos. We hope you find them to be helpful and provide you additional insight into the best enterprise asset management software on the market, Hexagon EAM. Today's topic will be on the use of date fields throughout EAM and some tips and tricks to make you more proficient inside the application.
Date fields within EAM are pretty cool. There's several different ways that you can enter dates into any date field on any screen within the system without having to interact with the little calendar control menu type thing that's attached to every date field. So I'm just as an example, and this is any screen in the system. So one of the things that I really love about Hexagon EAM is the fact that once you've kind of learned and mastered one screen, those kinds of things that you've learned and mastered on one screen apply to every screen in the system, just about. Date fields are fairly universal. So there's a lot of things that you can do with a date field whenever you see one on any screen, whether it's the work order, the purchase order, the requisition screen. So I've just picked on a blanket purchase order screen for our examples today. But the first thing that you can do when you're working with the date field is if you have a blank date like I do in the start date field, you can enter the current date by just simply hitting the space bar on your keyboard. So I hit the space bar and that defaults that field or that value, sets that value to today's date. Some other ways that I like to use the date field, I generally try to avoid using my mouse whenever possible, because if I learn how to kind of use the keys on my keyboard, it's typically a much faster way for me to enter information into the system. Another thing that you can do with dates is you can enter a date in what I call shorthand format. If I wanted to enter a start date for this blanket PO of 12/1 of the current year, I just have to type in 12/01. Tab out of the field, and it will default the 12/01 to December 1st, 2022. So it eliminated me from having to enter the slashes in the year 2022 in that. So if I'm working in a year outside of the current year, if I want to project this into the future, let's say the start or the end date is an example. If I want this end date to reflect 12/31 of 2023, I again can type in 12/31/23, tab out of the field, and it will default it to December 31st of 2023. You don't have to enter the slashes. You don't have to enter the year. And you can do that both looking forward in time and backwards in time. So I think it's a really neat way, and that's typically how I approach date fields anytime I run into them on any screen. There's also some things that we can do as EAM administrators to set default values for dates on screens. So I'm going to go into what's called screen designer mode, and this probably won't pertain to anyone outside of the EAM administration type of people that are reviewing this. But if I go into screen design, something that I can do is I can actually set default values based on the current date in the system. So in this case, I've set the default value for the start date to -7 days. Not a really good example relative to a blanket purchase order, but if you do have a need to set a date default to some point in time in the future, in the future or in the past, you just simply, or today's date even, you just simply have to indicate whether you want to subtract 7 days, add 7 days, or in these examples, subtract 7 days and add 365 days.
Okay.
I can also specify if I set the default value to +0, it'll just set that date field to the current date. I'll save that change that I made there, exit screen design. And if I create a new record now, my default start date is 12/13 of 2022, and I've added 365 days to that to come up with 12/13 of 2023 as my default end date. So this is an annual blanket purchase order, say. But you can set those values on any date field on any screen throughout the system if you find that you would like to have a default established for some of those fields.
Okay, excellent.
And then, of course, there is always the traditional way of selecting the date, which is this calendar control within the date field. This is kind of my last resort. Since I can enter a shorthand date, 1201 defaults to the current year, or 1201 2020, 120120, that'll default it to 12/1 of 2020. I prefer to enter information into the system that way when I'm working with date fields, as opposed to using the calendar control. The calendar control, is available, but I find it more challenging. There's a lot of button clicks involved, and it's much faster for me to just simply type in the information that I need that date to represent.
Okay.
So that's it. Those are kind of my tips and tricks with regard to date fields in EAM and all the screens within the system that have date fields on them.